just watching Larry fuss with his headsets. This is a man with a law degree, and he's trying to figure out how headphones work.
There's a reason I didn't study engineering.
Pull your mic down a little bit to it, so
Okay.
that it's at mouth level.
All right.
Great to have you with us. Good to
It's
see you.
great to be here.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in for the first time and you're looking around the table at who aligns with who politically, and you don't know anything other than I'm just tuning into this program for the first time, but I know right now that guy in the camo is a Trump-loving American. You're wrong.
I'm an American.
America.
Let's welcome in our Friday Five, the returnees from the first segment, the two-star Admiral Bill Stubblefield.
Good morning, Rob. Always fun to be here.
Sergeant Michael Heights.
Good morning, sir.
Longest tenured member of our crew. He served in the military as well. We missed you on Veterans Day, Michael, but happy Veterans Day, Michael.
Thank
Carl.
you. Appreciate it.
He is a graduate of law school, even though he is not an engineering student himself, Mr. Lawrence Schultz.
Great to be here.
And our third lawyer on the crew is on the phone, Joseph Joey Toots Ferretti.
I'm watching on television, and it looks like Larry just stepped out of his deer stand.
I got to tell you something else. It smells like Larry just stepped out of his deer stand, too.
Easy.
Unfortunately, Larry's one of those hunters that puts deer urine on himself and sits out in the woods for a while.
See, for those who can't smell this, which is everyone, that's simply not true.
It's fox urine.
As far as you know, it's not there, too. So, all right, we're ready to get started. No intros today. We're going to go plow right into it, and we go with our leadoff hitter, Mr. Joseph Ferretti.
Okay, Rob, thank you. My topic this morning is women in state government, specifically state legislatures, because I think we can all agree that's where the rubber hits the road regarding policy these days. So I looked at the history of women in state legislatures. It extends all the way back to 1894, which is, by the way, before women had the right to vote. But 3 women in Colorado became the first female legislators in the country to serve in the state legislature. Well, we've come a long way since then. It's not optimal today, but in the United States, approximately 34% of all state legislators are women. It should be about 50% to have real representation, of course, because 51% of the population is female. But we're working towards that, and it's increasing every year. Unfortunately, West Virginia is a laggard, and if you're watching on television, there's a graphic up there which shows what I think is a very, almost an embarrassing statistic in terms of where West Virginia ranks. We are in the bottom 10 states for female representation in our state legislature. In fact, we are 50th in the country. That figure you see by West Virginia, if you're watching again on television, is 11.9%. That's actually last year's statistic. Based upon the election results from just a week ago, we have decreased now where we're down to 10%. We have 134 representatives in Charleston in the House and the Senate, and we have 14 who are going to be female. In the West Virginia Senate itself, 4 out of 34 are female. I was struck, Rob, by Patricia Rucker's appearance on your show just a few days ago. Maria Lawrenson asked her a very important question. How many women are in the Senate based upon the latest election results? And Ms. Rucker said that there were 4. And no comment beyond that from her, which I was surprised because it was just months ago that she was actually the subject of an Associated Press story about women serving in state legislatures and how we've got a ways to go to get full representation for women with our policymakers. So my question this morning to the panel is this. Since we are a one-party state now, is it incumbent on the Republicans to start recruiting and supporting, financially and otherwise, women to run for some of these seats so that women are adequately represented at our state legislature? My first question. Second question, same issue about female representation. Imagine, if you will, this morning, what issues might be handled differently, what issues might actually gain prominence in our state legislature if we had adequate representation of women in our legislature, if West Virginia was not 50th in the nation in terms of the number of women serving in a representative capacity. Imagine what issues might be at the forefront for our West Virginia state legislature. I'll start out the conversation by raising one. The issue of child care in this state, the funding of it, the support of it, the importance of it, so that females can participate in the workforce, I believe would get more attention and more support in our state legislature if we had better female representation. I'm sure there are other issues. What are they, guys?
All right, let's get to it. Let's go to the first member of the panel who has delegate experience, Michael Haidt.
Well, I don't know that we're not recruiting women. I look in Berkeley County, and there were several women that ran in races, either in the primary or in the general. So I don't tend to look at identity politics, gender, black, white, Hispanic. I just don't look at that. I look at who puts their name in the ring, what their policies are, what their stances are, and I either support or don't support them based on that. We just replaced Eric Householder with Lisa White, who was highly recruited by the Republicans. Pam Brush, I can't remember the young lady in the 91st that ran against DeSoto, and
Tammy Hess in the 91st.
Yeah, Tammy Hess.
You had Maria Russo running in the Democratic primary.
And the Valentine.
And Lucia Valentine, the Democratic primary.
So, I see women in politics running for these offices all the time. I don't know what, like I said, I don't look at identity when it comes time for the politics. It's more about policy for me. So, I don't have an answer for you.
Billy?
Yeah, Joe, I don't have an answer either. I'd be curious. You've raised a thought though. Is there a correlation, or is there a study that shows there's a correlation between party and gender as far as elected officials? My gut sense is there are probably more women in the Democratic Party running for Democratic office than there are Republicans running for Republican office. I don't know that for a fact. That's just my gut sense. I do know that in the Eastern Panhandle, we two in the primaries, one of which was successful, one was not, and then we had in the general two very, very accomplished women running on the Democratic ticket. Very articulate, very knowledgeable, because of politics, because of party identity. Neither one were successful. I think they both would have been a very, very good delegate if they had been elected. But in this case, party trumped the gender. And I'll come back to my original gut sense is that there are more women in the Democratic Party holding office than there are Republicans. But I don't know for a fact.
That may be correct. It's probably fairly easy to research. Mr. Schultz?
Yeah, it seems like what Bill's saying makes perfect sense. And so you then wonder, are they not getting votes in the general election because they're Democrats or because they're women? Or both. And, there is two times now, a woman has run at the top of the ticket across the whole country, and one time she won the popular vote, one time she lost the popular vote, but both times she lost the election. So to the extent that part of this is men don't want women running things, then we do have a very serious problem in West Virginia if that's the reason why women can't get elected. If it's just that they don't want Democrats running things, and the majority are Democrats, as Bill says, and if that's true, then that's a different set of things, and it may make it even easier there are probably plenty of Republican men who aren't going to vote for a Democrat or a woman. It's a problem that West Virginia needs to address, because there are a whole bunch of problems we have. And I bring this up fairly often. I never miss a chance, in fact. The DHHR numbers. We can't get enough Child Protective Services workers. My county, Morgan County, has 0 Child Protective Services workers. So if somebody calls in a child abuse case, the person has to come from either Berkeley or Grant County to Morgan County to serve. It's odd, but it looks to me from the DHHR dashboard that we have in Morgan County 0 children in foster care. 0. And I wonder why. Is that because people in Morgan County, this just never happens? Or is it because we don't have anybody there keeping an eye on things? It seems to me that both are possible. Now, maybe I'm misreading the dashboard. It's not all that clearly labeled, but it looks like there are 0 children in foster care at this time in Morgan County.
And that pertains to what Joe asked, Hal?
I think if there were more women in the legislature, there might be more attention paid to that sort of issue.
All right, now before I allow men to take the blame for women not running for office, which I won't do on this show, let me just point this out. In the state of West Virginia, more than 50% of the population is female. So if there's a complaint that there aren't enough females elected and you want to blame men, try again. Because more than 50% of the population of this state is female. So if you want more women in office, women run for office and vote for women. Don't blame men. As far as I can tell, men are the minority in this state. If I look at the math,
well, if anybody,
better than 50% are female.
If anybody of any gender is running, is voting on the basis of the gender of the candidate, period, and saying, I will never vote for a woman, I don't care if they're a man or a woman, I disagree with them, and I do blame them.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I don't vote for someone based on whether they are a man or a woman, but I've had plenty of women tell me that they don't vote for women for elected office. Right? Well, I'll take this back. There's a little story, right? So this goes back to my college days, and it was a National Honor Society service fraternity, which of the people selected for this, from the people who were invited, I think there were 42, 45 members, something to that effect. I think there was a total of 5 or 6 males. The rest were all females, right? So when it came time to vote for vice president, there was a female who went through college and law school in 6 years, is a partner in a law firm in Pittsburgh right now, is a champion fundraiser, has the resume that would knock you dead. You would hire this person in a second to do anything that you would. First name was Marie. She was running for vice president, and I'd have voted for her 10 times if I could have. We could not find anybody to run against her, but the rules said somebody had to run against her. So a friend of mine who was also in there, Jerry Perello, he goes, all right, I'll just throw my name in there so we can get on with this. He crushed her in the election. Crushed her.
Yeah.
He didn't squeak in. He crushed her in the election. Why? Because as Marie was giving her resume, which was impeccable, you could look around the room and see that all these other girls were talking to her. Who does she think she is? They voted for a guy who flat out said, I don't want to be vice president, but I will because we need to get this over with. And he won. Was that his fault because he ran? Whose fault was it that he won? Whose fault was it that a person who didn't want to be in the office and said so won that election convincingly? Now, granted, that's a small sample size. We're going back, 40 years for that story. But nevertheless, it's a social studies problem right there. And I think when you hear some of the anecdotes that were told about this election, I think that applied again. In some cases, there was women who didn't want to vote for another woman. How was that a man's fault? Joe?
Oh, it's not about laying blame at this point. It's about a party, a Republican Party, recognizing that they run everything in the state of West Virginia. They've been successful in recruiting good candidates. I hearken back to 2010, 2012, 2014, when there was a concerted effort by the party to get good candidates to run. Hats off to them. They were extremely successful in doing that. All I'm suggesting is they can look at these statistics. They can see where West Virginia, once again, is 50th in the nation and say this is something we need to try to address. So let's make a concerted effort to not only recruit good female candidates, but support them so that somebody like an Amy Grady, who ran against Mitch Carmichael and had $2,500 of support against Mitch Carmichael's $127,000 of support, the party could make sure that's a more fair fight. Now, Amy Grady pulled it off and beat Mitch with the help of a lot of teachers in her district. But that's not always the case. A lot of women put their name up there for election, but they don't get the party support. On the Facebook page this morning, somebody mentioned that they thought about running as a Republican woman and didn't think they'd get party support. And I also see issues being raised about, well, women can't take the time from their career or raising their children and go to Charleston. Well, let's make it easier for them. Do you know in the state legislature in Illinois, which has had female legislators for 70 years, only in the year 2011 did they put in a women's restroom? Can you imagine that? Women had to go to the restroom by crossing the street to go to another public building for relief, missing votes. And frankly, there was a lot of gamesmanship in the Illinois legislature about making sure the women were out of the room when they took votes. They didn't get a restroom until just 13 years ago. These are the kind of things that we need to address. And I think it's sorely needed in West Virginia so that women like my three daughters feel like they have a voice in the state and don't have to leave. If you're looking at one of the reasons why a lot of young people leave West Virginia, I would posit that a lot of those people leaving are females, and it's because they look at the state legislature and they don't see any action on Medicaid extension for postpartum or doulas, or PEIA extension for coverage for those items. They don't see action on teen social media protections, or that breastfeeding is going to be something that is available in public buildings. These were the issues that Senator Laura Chapman worked on in West Virginia, one of 4 West Virginia female senators. Those issues don't get the time of day, to the chagrin of many women in our state, many young women who would like to make careers in the state. So my advice to the Republican Party is simply make an effort, help correct this situation so that, again, we're not 50th in the country.
But you assume that the Republican Party in West Virginia doesn't. I mean, and you use Amy Grady as an example. Why would the Republican Party back a candidate to take down one of the leaders of the Republican Party? That makes no sense. If it had been a man, they wouldn't have backed him.
Amy Grady is now one of the leaders of the party.
That's
right?
true, because she took down Mitch Carmichael. But it could have been a man running against Mitch Carmichael, and they would not have gotten the support because Mitch Carmichael was one of the leaders of the Republican Party in the legislature at the time.
He was the Senate president, actually, yeah.
Nobody's going to run. Nobody's going to support a candidate against him.
Well, but Amy Grady is a prime example of why it sometimes might make sense to do that. Now we have, at least in her, with her, effective representation on some of these issues that women find important.
And she's an excellent legislator. You're absolutely correct. But nobody, in your example, nobody would have supported anybody against Mitch Carmichael. It would not have made any difference in their identity. They would not have supported. The Republican Party would not have supported them against Mitch Carmichael at that point.
I don't know. We had a Senate president just over on the other side of the interstate who got a lot of whose candidate who ran against him got a lot of Republican support
from the party.
From elements of the party, sure.
Well, from individuals,
and I'm
absolutely.
not just singling out the party itself, but I'm talking about Republicans in general.
But you did single out the party. You said that the party needed to recruit more women for these positions. You said it was the party that needed to do that.
Well, to put these people up, sure, and support them. But, look, if you're not going to take on incumbents at all, if you're not going to try to address this, then we'll remain 50th in the country.
Well, you can't get a bigger party involvement than Roger Hanshaw doing a political ad for Pam Brush in the primary, and this was the John Hardy seat, in which Chris Andrews won in the primary, and Roger Hanshaw flat out did an ad endorsing Pam Brush as the kind of Republican that we need in the legislature. So there's an example there, and Pam still lost to Chris Andrews. What, Bill?
You have not given Mike Carl a chance.
No, sorry, Mike.
Mike, you're sitting there kind of quietly, I guess politely.
Well, I was waiting to be called on.
You got caught up in the crossfire.
I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, you got time. Go ahead.
Let's recognize that this this problem, this issue, and I agree that we need more women involved in a lot of leadership positions, all around. But it's from a deep cultural, prejudice and and allocation of responsibilities that goes it's back centuries. And then women first started even getting into the workforce, and they were waitresses and low level clerks and cleaning people and so forth. But it's evolving, but it's still way from equality, and it has virtually nothing to do with partisanship between the two parties. I mean, it's cultural and it's deep in our culture. But my mother was a clerk, a secretary and a clerk in a small town, and that was kind of a big deal. And at that point, it was my first wife and the mother of my three children is a school teacher, which is one of the typical, female career advancements, so to speak. But my current wife was a senior manager in two major, international medical product companies in J&J and Eli Lilly, and so there's an evolution, but it's evolving from an old cultural bias.
Well, I mean, if you want more representation in office, run for office, win elections. You can't get more women in office if more women don't run for office in West Virginia.
We do see more resistance to the change of old cultural biases in our state than in states that are more dynamic in terms of their population, both Democratic and Republican states. Things move kind of slow in West Virginia in those terms, in the way that as the culture changes, the politics change. We don't do that, snap of the fingers here. And I think it is something, I think Joe's right, it is something that we should focus on more, because there are issues that would get ignored if one gender controls the entire apparatus. There's no question, and that's a cultural thing that's as old as Adam and Eve.
Or if one gender discusses that issue, which we just did here for the last 20 minutes, by the way. Joe, thank you very much. We'll be back with the Admiral on the clock in a moment here, too. This segment of the show brought to you by our friends at the Berkeley County Health Department, the Quick Response Team, by elder care attorney Danny Staggers in Martinsburg at 304-267-3915, and by WVU Medicine, Berkeley Medical Center, Jefferson Medical Center, leading healthcare here and everywhere. This is Talk Radio, WRNR Martinsburg, and TV10. We are produced by the sports doctor Colin McLaughlin, who is, along with the sports crew, suddenly free on Friday nights during the high school football playoffs, which aren't being played. And brought to you in part by Hagerstown Ford. They'll bring your car to you after you buy it, and Take it back if you don't like it, too, at Hagerstown Ford. They do that with service now as well. Also by the Mansion Ferretti Law Firm, where Joe Ferretti is standing by to tell you more. Mr. Ferretti, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready. I'm in a big battle on Facebook. Apparently, I've picked the hornet's nest.
You started it, Joe.
Are the
Your
majority of
hornet's
the commenters men or women, Joe?
Oh man, I've been accused of mansplaining and sexist and identity politics and DEI and anyhow, Rob, we're downtown Martinsburg. If you still see fit to come see a lawyer.
This is what happens when you have 6 men sitting around talking about women's issues.
Which is the kind of the problem I'm trying to address.
With issue number 2, the Admiral, Bill Stubblefield.
Yeah, and Joe, I'm going to shy away from the discussion you have because I do not want to take Facebook on like you did. So I'm going to talk about filibuster at the U.S. Senate level. This is a discussion that we had after the show last Friday. We had a fairly rich discussion over it. We also, with our political breakfast on Thursday, it came up, and I find that it's that my Republican friends say it will never happen. The filibuster will continue. There will be no attempt at all to get rid of it. I think I'm going to make an argument that there is some chance, I think, of it being eliminated in the next 2 years, and I'll explain why in just a second. The filibuster is not a constitutional issue. It is written in, it's a Senate rules, and it can come and go depending upon the desire of the Senate. In fact, until I think 2008, it covered both judicial appointments and legislative appointments. Harry Reid changed that, and judicial appointments is no longer subjected to a filibuster. We think of a filibuster back of what we had in 1997 with Strom Thurmond talking for about 26, 27 hours straight, along with a little bit of help from Robert Byrd. But it's right now you do not have to be on the floor. You can just declare a filibuster. And to get rid of it, it requires 60 votes to overturn the filibuster. And again, we're talking about legislation, not judicial. The Democrats flirted with getting rid of the filibuster last session, and Joe Manchin and Semia from Arizona were the only two that voted against it. My reason thinking that it may, in fact, be overturned this time is, one, the Republicans realize that if the Democrats have a chance, they're going to get rid of the filibuster. But more than that is Donald Trump in 2016 had full backing of both the Senate and the House. He did not get all of his bills through, and then with the 2018, I think he lost the House, so he no longer had control of both bodies. If he's going to get something through now, he has 2 years with a guarantee that he has a sympathetic House and sympathetic Senate. I would be very surprised if because he wants to get all of his legislation through, I'd be very surprised if he does not push to get rid of the filibuster, not only judicial, but also legislative matter, just because he feels he has this 2-year window and he's going to take full advantage of it.
Mike Carl, since you went last time, go first this time.
Well, I don't. The filibuster, in its present form, I think has served us well. I don't. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump, pushes to change it, and at least to legislative, not so much judicial appointments, but and that wouldn't surprise me. But I'm skeptical that it'll be dropped to any degree, because I think there's so many members of, particularly of the Republican side, the majorities now coming in, who recognize the restraining value that it has provided, and certainly would be fearful of the Democrats gained majority and got rid of it. I don't doubt that Trump may try for it, or at least based on legislative matters, not judicial appointment matters. But I'd be real surprised if the majority or 60 members of the Senate agree to change it.
It's only required 50 to get rid of it.
You said 60.
No, 60 right now. The filibuster to get legislation through, it has to be 60. But to eliminate the filibuster,
is that just a majority?
Just the majority.
Okay,
and they had the majority to do that.
Okay, well, I still don't think it's going to happen.
Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, these are the same Republican senators that we're thinking about here who are going to be faced with Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, RFK as the Director of DHHS, Matt Gaetz as Attorney General of the United States. And so they're going to be, it seems to me, those three opening shots from Trump are a warning to them that if you don't keep something in place to act as a brake on his insanity, then you're going to end up with a lot of craziness in our government. A guy with parasitic brain worms running the DHHS, a woman who's never been involved in intelligence at all as the Director of National Intelligence, a woman, by the way, who doesn't appear to be very intelligent herself, and so on and so forth. So when you have the clowns that have now been nominated, this is a warning shot for the Republicans in the Senate that how much crazy do you want to endorse before we put a set of brakes on this?
I think from the last segment we're supposed to support Tulsi Gabbard because she's a female, though, aren't we?
I don't recall saying ever anything like that.
Joe, isn't that what you were saying?
Rob,
we recruited a female for this position. We better get behind her.
come on.
Joe, go. That was your turn now, Joe. Go ahead.
All right. Bill, to your question, I think there's less likely a chance that the filibuster is going to go away because of the election of John Thune as the Senate Majority Leader. If it had been Rick Scott, who is a unimpressive figure in my mind and certainly a supporter of Trump, I think there would have been more of a risk. But going with more of a Senate institutionalist that John Thune is, I believe, is a signal that the Senate is going to want to conduct business under regular order. And that will include exercising its powers of advice and consent when it comes to some of these cabinet nominees. There's going to be a lot of pressure from Trump, and because he exerts a lot of power these days, it's going to be hard to resist. And you may actually see some of the things that the Democrats considered, which was carving out exceptions for one piece of legislation or another to get around the filibuster rule. But by and large, I think that policy will hold because of what the Senate has already signaled, and that is that regular order is still going to be given a lot of deference. How they've done things in the past will be prologue. So that's my thinking, but I think it's going to be under a lot of pressure, perhaps more pressure than has ever been exerted against the policy of the filibuster.
Mr. Haidt?
Yeah, I look back about a year and a half ago, and it was the Democrats that really wanted to get rid of the filibuster, and we're talking about getting rid of the filibuster. And there was one Democrat senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, who stood up and said, "This is idiotic. This is a fool's errand. This is the only tool that the minority has when they are not in power. And to take that away would be ridiculous. Just because we're in power now doesn't mean we're always going to be in power." And now they're seeing that. And I would think the Democrats want to keep the filibuster now. I also think the Republicans recognize that as well, that they recognize that they are not always going to have control of the Senate. and to do away with the only tool that the minority has would be foolish. And I think there are enough smart people in the Senate on both sides that say, no, we need to keep this. It is the only tool that the minority has, and we are both going to be in the minority from time to time. So I don't see it going away.
Yeah, and Mike, you're making the point that the argument that everybody makes, that you do not want the seesaw back and forth. But I do think things have changed because of this two-year window that the President Trump feels like he's got to get through. Also, to Larry's point, as far as the confirmation, it appears there's going to be another way to get around the confirmation. That's going to be the recess appointment. That too will show the strength of the leadership of John Toome.
I think you're right, but I also think that enough of them have seen what happened a few years back when you mentioned Harry Reid did away with it when it came to judge appointments, and look how that backfired for the Democrats.
Oh yeah, and I'm not arguing any of that, Mike. I think it did backfire, and there's been many folks have made the argument Harry Reid made a mistake that, but. The I'm trying to make one point, one simple point, is that Trump sees he has a 2-year window that he can get all of his legislation through. After that, it's going to be a crapshoot of who controls the House and the Senate. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure exerted by Trump on the Senate to allow this the legislation to get through.
According to the Brookings website, the first real live filibuster was in 1837. It would be a shame to end it 13 years shy of its 200th birthday, Bill. The bicentennial is coming up. Bicentennial on the way. 13 years.
I'm a strong proponent of the filibuster. I would like to keep it there, but I think that if you look at the personalities, there it's going to be more pressure to get rid of it now than what we've seen in the last several years.
I don't disagree with you, but the recess appointment is something that's already being discussed as a way to get around it. So.
But it's interesting with the recess, they have to be gone more than 10 days or more, and both parties have to agree to a recess more than 3 days. So it's not going to be as simple as the Republicans saying we're going to go to we're going on recess for 10 days so Trump can make all these recess appointments. Both parties have to agree.
If the filibuster stays in place, how many times will the newly anointed Jim Justice, senator from West Virginia, commence a filibuster to stop them from coming in? You know, when they're in a recess, you know, can he set up a thing and maybe Zoom call it from the Greenbrier? Well, he doesn't want to go to Washington.
You've confused my issue, Larry.
Under the current rules, he may be able to, and that's one of the problems with the filibuster right now. When you talk about the filibuster, is how they've modified the rules. If you're going to filibuster, stand up and filibuster.
Exactly.
No bathroom breaks. No turning it over to somebody else. You stand up and filibuster.
And this is what Strom Thurmond did in 1957 for something like 26 hours.
So, Joe, were the Illinois women back in the day doing a lot of filibustering because they couldn't go to the restroom?
No, but I do want to correct the record. Mike Height is absolutely correct. It was Joe Manchin who stood up for the filibuster. It was also Kristen Sinema, Arizona senator, who helped protect the filibuster. Just to keep in theme with the power of women in political office.
Well, Bill, you said it would take 10 days for a recess appointment, 10 days of Congress being out.
Exactly right, yes.
Well, there's two. We know Congress doesn't agree on a lot, but if there's two things Congress agrees on, it's one, taking as much time off as possible, and two, getting paid during a government shutdown. They can all agree on that one.
Yeah, except the fact if the Democrats are not going to agree to this because that would open the door for Trump to make his recess appointments.
Bill, don't ruin my jokes with facts.
I'm just trying to follow Larry.
Issue number 3, Mr. Michael Height.
All right, I'm going to bring it back local here. So yesterday, the courts decided that Spring Mills wins their lawsuit. And now they're going to have their forfeits reinstated. So my question is, what does this mean for West Virginia high school football? And more importantly, What does this mean for the WVSSAC?
Joe, before we get further into this, we did a segment with you yesterday that was excellent on the McKinney-Vento Act. If you would like to give everybody a little summary of the McKinney-Vento Act, because this is what the Spring Mills suit was about, as they took it before Judge Deborah McLaughlin against the WVSSAC.
Yes, that reputable law firm at Bowles Rice, they raised this issue representing the Board of Education. McKinney-Vento was a statute passed back in the 80s regarding federal funding and support for homelessness and people who find themselves to be homeless. That was extended to minors and children who were matriculating towards public schools if they were classified or designated as being home insecure or homeless. The public schools had to accept them. And there was both federal and state support to ensure that they were able to get a free public education and to engage in all extracurricular activities, including sports. Spring Mills said that the student in question, whose eligibility was I guess the eligibility was raised as a question. Spring Mills maintained that this individual fell under the protections of that law, and thus questions regarding residency, which the state board and the SSAC looks at in terms of eligibility and who's on what team, residency was affected by the fact that this young man was designated as home insecure and fell under the protections of the law. And at the hearing yesterday, my understanding is that Judge McLaughlin ruled in the school's favor that, in fact, this young man did fall under the protections of the Act, and that any concerns about residency and whether he was eligible to play for Spring Mills had to be addressed within the parameters of that law. And thus the SSAC lost the court decision.
Thank you for the summary there, Joe. Okay, Bill, what do you think about this?
I don't really know. And and I think there's two issues. We're getting caught up on the eligibility, but to me, the more pressing issue is the realignment and how the SSAC is going to sort through the realignment. That's what's going to put a real black eye on high school sports, and they've got to sort this out.
Mr. Schultz, and the secondary question is, what does this mean for the SSAC in terms of their ability to govern?
Yes, and I was going to go to that. I have this impression, and I may be factually dead wrong. I have this impression that the SSAC is run, like many things in this state, largely in the Charleston vicinity. And it strikes me as odd that the two best teams in the state are Martinsburg and Spring Mills. And both of them have recently had some issues with the SSAC. And I'm just wondering, do we have statewide representation on the board of the SSAC, or is this basically a bunch of people from Charleston who are going to decide how the playoffs get set up every year?
Dan Comer from Spring Mills is on the board of the SSAC.
Okay,
so yeah,
good.
we do.
I take it he was probably outvoted in the decision-making process, but it just strikes me as very odd, even though the claims about this student have now progressed and been revealed more to be very serious. That's not something you can judge that way. This federal law says if this child is home insecure or is homeless and is not living with his legal guardians, you can't discriminate against him and say, okay, well, then you can't play football. And that is odd that the SSAC had put a rule in place that clearly violates federal law back in the 80s or the 90s, whenever they put it in place. But I'm sorry for all the disruption of the playoffs, but at least it's good to get a legal opinion that sorts it out.
Michael, it's your firm. Do you have the ability to comment, or do you have to recuse yourself?
I have to recuse myself on the merits of the case. I do have a long time concern about the Charleston-focused bias of the SSAC. I could say that. And as a Martinsburg High fan, I'm glad that the game with Spring Mills was played before all this, played out. So that Martinsburg High's superiority is based on what happened on the field, not in the courtroom.
Now, this did not overturn Martinsburg's loss, by the way,
No.
due to a forfeit, just as for Spring Mills'
Right.
loss.
Are the similar?
I don't know exactly. Colin's shaking his head no what the Martinsburg situation is. I think that was grades, whereas the Spring Mills was residency. Joe, you have tangled with the SSAC in the past concerning volleyball and club tryouts. It's unusual for the SSAC ultimately to have decisions overturned, isn't it?
It is. They are paid great deference by our Supreme Court because the Supreme Court doesn't want to get involved in managing high school athletics. So, Mike Hornby and I had a discussion last night about this. Mike's commitment to public policy continues to amaze me. And this is just another issue that he raised, and I think it's a good one. And I think you're going to see the legislature exert more scrutiny over the SSAC because right now they don't have a lot of influence over what the SSAC does, other than the fact that they are the source of the enabling legislation that created the SSAC. But since then, it's been hands-off. The courts have been pretty much hands-off, except for what Judge McLaughlin did yesterday. It's more likely than not that the SSAC does prevail in our court system. But the bottom line is I think the legislature, to Mike's question about the effects of this decision, I think the legislature is now going to hear from a lot of different parts of the state of West Virginia and are going to feel some sort of pressure from some corners of the state to do a review of the SSAC and see if the legislature needs to step in and do some reforms. Because bottom line is that there's just been too many lawsuits, too much disruption in the volleyball tournament and the state football tournament this year that I think it's just too much for the legislature to ignore.
Dan Comer, from who, by the way, was at Hedgesville earlier in his education career, and then Spring Mills. He is the assistant executive director of the WVSAC, and then District 2 member, and that would be our area, is Trent Sherman, who is at Martinsburg High School, and he is, as I said, one of the 5 district members. There are 5 who make up that group there, and he's district member number 2. The offices themselves are in Parkersburg, by the way. Back to you, Mike Height.
So I think that the bigger issue is how the WVSSAC is going to be affected by this. They, with the realignment that Bill spoke of, they had some pushback on that, and they were overruled by the Department of Education earlier this year, and now they've lost a lawsuit. With the decision they made. So I think there is a push to really take a deep dive look at the WVSSAC and how they're ruling. I also find it very interesting that we have a public school system that is made that the ADs and the school principals within our public system have created this private entity to oversee the public extracurricular activities. And, I'm not sure how that is even legal, that public paid officials are creating a private industry or entity to oversee public extracurricular activities. And, I think the state Supreme Court should take a deep dive into that. And if nothing else, that should be dissolved. The public system should be taking care of itself in a public manner.
All right, we move on to issue number 4 after the break. Larry, you are on the clock. This segment of our show today brought to you in part by the Skinner Accident and Injury Attorneys at SkinnerWins.com. By Orsini's Home Store, not just an appliance store any longer, at 360 Hack Wilson Way, Martinsburg, and at Orsini's.com. We are brought to you in part by Larry DeMarco and Company at Century 21 Modern Realty Results, by the Wagner Law Firm, West Virginia's premier DUI defense attorney. One, folks, Larry Schultz.
My question is this.
Hold on, I want to sit back and enjoy this.
Will the sycophants in the Republican Party confirm Matt Gaetz? Now, I misspelled sycophants, and it's the way it's in my text. I should tell everybody it's sycophants, and I'm taking credit for a new word, actually, because you'd have to be crazy to lick Donald Trump's boots with these appointments. Feel free to discuss any of the three clown cabinet members who've been proposed. That would be Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I had a brain problem there for a moment.
That's from the preservatives that are in your food.
or it could be a worm that we don't know about yet. Okay, so my issue is, will they actually confirm these people who are singularly in my lifetime unqualified to do these jobs?
So we now have the answer to the question, why did Larry wear camo today? And that's so when he leaves here, he can blend in with the woods in case there's any reaction to this issue. All right, I'm going to start first with the person who agrees with you most, Mike Carl. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I would say that Gaetz is probably far more qualified than many of the cabinet members that have been appointed recently by the Democratic presidents. But that aside, I think part of it is just Trump once again sending a signal, and whether he's confirmed is, I think, still a very open question.
And the other two, Gabbard and Kennedy?
Oh, I thought we were just talking about Gaetz.
You can feel free to ask to talk about any of them.
I think
to me they're all.
I think the same. My same points applied
across the board.
Across the board, right?
All right, Bill.
Yeah, the one thing that all three have in common is they're not shrinking violets. They're very much in your face, and I think that's deliberate on the part of Trump's part. And I'm going to agree with Mike Carl. I'm going to pick it up a little bit farther. I think I don't know if Trump's serious with this or not. I think if you can get him through, he'd be very happy. But he's probing. He's probing to see how far he can go with the Senate and with the public. And and I also am curious to see how far he will go if there is some pushback on the part of the Senate in confirmation. This comes back to what we were talking about earlier, the recess appointments or the filibuster, whatever the case may be. I think Trump is using this as a test grounds and for future legislative action that he may or may not do. So I think it's a probing effect.
Mr. Haidt.
Well, I'm going to push back first on the Tulsi Gabbard thing, and we talked a little bit about this off air. I don't see Tulsi Gabbard as being an idiot in any form. This is the woman that back in 2020 single-handedly took Kamala Harris out of the presidential race during the debates. So this is not a stupid woman. And I think Democrats don't like her now just because she has switched parties, because she thought the Democrat Party that she had belonged to was going way too far left. Now, having said that, the other two are suspect, I will admit. However, they still have to get through the Senate confirmation. So, the Senate is going to look at some of these picks and say, okay, Donald, no, this isn't going to happen. You need to pick a more qualified person. So I think these are just, in-your-face type picks right now for Trump, just to get I think he made some promises to people like Kennedy to bring him on board to his side, and this is just his way of paying it back. I don't know that the Senate confirms. But I wonder where the outrage was, 4 years ago when people like Sam Brinton were picked, Pete Buttigieg, who were DEI picks more than they were qualified for the positions that they were supposed to be representing. So, this happens on both sides all the time. Unqualified people or less than qualified people are put into these positions.
Joseph Ferretti.
Well, I can see Mike, the shoe being on the other foot in some respects, and this happens in a lot of administrations. There's always a questionable pick or two as a nominee, and whether they're qualified or not. But Matt Gaetz is another level of someone being unacceptable. I mean, this is a guy who the Republicans wanted to run out of the House, who was running around on the House floor showing videos of his sexual conquests after ingesting a cocktail of ED medication and Red Bull. And that didn't, I'm not making that up. That is actually from a Republican House member.
Bill wanted to know if you could repeat that, the ingredients to that drink there, Joe.
Slowly, Joe.
Yeah, spell it out if you will, Joe.
He's copying it down on his notebook.
We'll talk offline, Joe. Hey, the way that you've stirred up the Facebook, be careful, Joe.
Yeah, it's we're having fun this morning. Well, I just this is another level. I mean, I look back at the nominees' recent history for Attorney General, and people who served on the appeals courts and were a part of the Justice Department as U.S. attorneys and all. And you got Matt Gaetz, who was a lawyer for 2 years and then became a congressman. It's the qualifications aren't even close to what history shows has been important for other nominees. Bottom line here is, this is just Trump being Trump, and he has utter disdain for the Department of Justice. Some might say justifiably, but the issue of qualifications I don't think is the real question here, and it should not be the focus. He wants to take as was said by one of his supporters, he wants to take a blowtorch to some of these agencies, and he's going to do it by putting people in there who have no desire to run the agency the way it's been run for decades. They have a desire to tear it down. That's his goal. And I think when it comes to Health and Human Services, the FDA, the CDC, that falls under that, and the Justice Department, I think that's his goal, and I think that's why you're seeing these nominees.
Yeah, if I can add as well, I think another goal Trump right now is to use smokescreen. Everybody's putting their attention toward Matt Gaetz. The other nominees will come near getting through. If he has the sacrificial lamb, he's identified as sacrificial lamb.
It will be interesting to see if Kennedy gets through, because the health community this morning is up in arms over his name being associated with health. And Larry, go ahead.
Well, and the Department of Defense, along with Hegseth as well.
That's true.
So there's a lot of pushback on numerous fronts.
Larry, back to you.
Did Mike? Did
Yeah.
you go? Okay.
He went first.
That was nice of you to look out up to Mike, though.
Yeah, thank you.
You forgot him once, and then I forgot that he went. All three of these people, and I agree with Joe that Matt Gaetz is singular among the three in terms of his unqualified nature in this. And the other thing that I think is going on, and we'll just focus on Gaetz and the Department of Justice, there's always a cadre of thousands and thousands of lawyers in the Department of Justice who are partway through their careers. And one of the things the career criminal Donald Trump would like to do is to see those good lawyers take a hike. And if they put somebody like Matt Gaetz in charge of their employment, that's exactly what we're going to see is mass resignations from the Department of Justice. Look, as far as Attorney General goes, Matt Harvey in Jefferson County or Katie Wilkes Delegati, regardless of party, would be better qualified than Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General of the United States. That guy just isn't even close. So this is either some kind of a ploy, or they're testing to see just how sycophantic the Republican Senate will be.
This is a new word just coined this morning. Sycophantic.
Yeah, Larry. You know what's interesting though? Matt Gaetz won got his seat back in Congress by a greater margin of votes than he did previously. This despite all the ethics charges and reports that are due out, and all. He won his seat by 32 points.
Well, the update is that Matt Gaetz has resigned from the Congress as of yesterday.
And his father will probably be appointed to replace him.
Okay, great.
And I'm not sure this wasn't a political move to get him out of Congress without all the ethics reports coming out about him, and just to get him out altogether, because I really don't think he makes it through Senate confirmation.
I think that ethics report is somehow going to find its way to the national press. I can't be sure, but I think so.
Well, even Republicans are asking to see it at this point.
Yeah, and that decision will be made today.
Yeah. All right, issue number 5, Michael Carl.
Okay, I'm asking the question, is there any reason, or what would be a good reason for Biden to resign before the end of his term and enable Harris to become president for a brief period? Is there any good reason why that might happen?
So are you rooting for this scenario?
I'm rooting for chaos on the Democratic side. So
I think you've got that right now. They just lost the House, the Senate.
They can't lose enough from where I sit.
Nothing left to lose.
They'd already lost the House.
Right. Yeah. Well, they didn't get it back. Yeah. All right. So this kind of reminds me toward the end of Bush 43's term, when Obama was elected following 2 years of Bush 43, and Nancy Pelosi said he should resign right now. That was right after election night in, 2009, I guess. She wanted Bush out of town that night. So this kind of follows up on that note a little bit. Go ahead, Bill. You go first.
Yeah, you asked the question, is there any reason? I cannot think of any reason. If he was to step down, and if Kamala Harris was acting, or not acting, but president, there'd be a star behind the name, asterisk behind the name. So no one would give her credit for ever being really president. I cannot think of any reason that would happen. I'm going to be extremely doubtful that it will. I think Biden is going to fulfill his term until January the 20th.
Mike, are you insinuating incompetency on Biden's part, or a setup so that Kamala Harris goes in the history books as a president?
B, but underlying this is one possible situation or basis for such a move, and that is that in return for the glory that she would get, that being president, even briefly, she would agree to pardon Hunter.
Oh, well, that's an elaborate setup.
Yeah. But Joe Biden can pardon him just as well.
Well, but then he wouldn't. He said he wasn't going to do it, and this way he could keep that word and still have him pardoned.
But what's the word hypocrisy? That was when he said that when he thought Kamala Harris might win the election.
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't need me to find problems with Joe Biden. I mean, he speaking of Hunter, I mean, Joe Biden has enabled influence peddling for decades to the great wealth of his family. So that's just the beginning of Joe Biden.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes, I'm not too sure about the last comment that we heard, but I will point out that one president was pardoned, and he was pardoned by Gerald Ford. And you may recall his name was Dick Nixon. He was a criminal. He was going down, and they saved him. So all these fantasies about how ugly this could be if somebody pardoned the president's son, when they've tried again and again to convict him and they can't seem to do it, all that is simply trying to erase or forget about the memory that the one time in America that kind of seemingly very corrupt thing occurred, it was done by the Republican Party. All that all that being said, I don't see any reason why Kamala Harris would agree to it or Joe Biden would propose it. It's an interesting thing. It would technically make her the first woman president, but I don't believe that's going to happen.
Mr. Height.
Well, it won't happen, and this is why it won't happen. Number one, the Biden family does not like Kamala Harris. There is definitely friction between the two of them, and he just would not resign to do it. He would have to admit that he doesn't have the capacity to still be president, and he's not going to admit that. He still thinks he could have won had he not stepped down. And number two, to do that, then the whole Democratic Party would have to admit that Biden wasn't capable to be president all along if they're going to ask him to step down now. So they're not going to admit that either. So I don't see this happening at all. He will just be the lame duck president going through the next couple of months, and out the door. He'll have ceremonial things here and there, but that'll be it. And he will pardon his son on his way out the door. He doesn't care at this point. He's not going to be president for another 4 years, and he's going to, on his way out the door, he's going to pardon a lot of people, just like all presidents do, and his son will be one of them.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, it's clear Mike Carl wants to burn the Democratic House down and salt the earth on which it stands. But
What gave you that impression, Joe?
I don't see it happening, and perhaps, just musing here, but perhaps one reform that Matt Gaetz would institute at the Justice Department would be to ensure that the DOJ never again prosecutes a sitting president's family member. Just a thought, but
why don't you do that?
Bottom line here is I don't know about a pardon for,
because it's on the way.
I mean, Joe Biden's already on record as saying he wasn't going to do it. Now, whether he holds true to that or not, he's like any other politician. We can have our doubts, but I just think that would be further damaging for the Democrat brand, and I just don't see it happening.
Mike Carl, back to you.
Well, I need to interject that there was a reference to Richard Nixon getting pardoned. Richard Nixon was a great president. He made a couple of mistakes that got some criminal issues, but he was a great president and he deserved to be pardoned. Hunter Biden does not.
Facts.
Okay. I mean, how are you going to change the Republican view when it applies one way to them and another way to other people? You're not.
Speaking of things that applied one way or the other, did you happen to catch the Trump-Biden exchanges at the recent White House gathering that they had? And just your thoughts of how that exchange worked compared to, 4 years ago, Larry?
I didn't go into depth on that. It was certainly a lot more pleasant, and when the incumbent president and the newly arrived president-to-be spoke, they did it once in after the 16 election, and then once again, I guess after the 20 election.
No, there was actually no meeting in 20.
No. You mean he didn't go and talk to the man who beat him by 8 million votes?
No.
Huh. Boy, that's shocking. I don't think that even Trump thought it would be a good idea to be himself and the way he usually is in that meeting. And so, for once, he gets a little tiny star next to his name as having behaved as a decent human being.
Joe?
Yes, sir.
Yes, your thoughts on the recent visit to the White House by Donald Trump with Joe Biden?
Oh, it makes me feel good. It's what we've been doing forever, and I just wish he would have extended the same courtesy when Joe Biden was elected, and deserved to have a visit at the White House, and deserved to have Donald Trump at the inauguration.
Mike Height.
I sort of liked it. How magnanimous of Joe Biden, our current president, to act presidential and invite the newly elected president into the White House. And that's how the transition should occur, whether you liked him or not, or no matter what you said about him during the campaign. All that's irrelevant now. He is the president-elect, and Donald Trump probably should have done the same thing 4 years earlier.
30 seconds, Mike Carl.
I agree with everything Mike Height just said. I think both of them function professionally and on a high level, and especially given the background and the history of their relationship. So it was a good thing.
Bill?
Yeah, we've come a long way that we could accept what was done in 2020 as acceptable, and it should never be. We should always, the civility, the transition, the orderly transition that we're seeing in 2024, we did not see in 2020.
Yeah, I thought if anybody could have been a sore loser, it could have been Joe Biden. He was booted by his own party that he was loyal to his entire political life, and yet he stood tall, he manned up, and he was quite gracious.
Yeah.
I've never been a Joe Biden fan. I don't have anything really good to say about his political career because I've never liked the guy. But in that moment, I was pretty proud of Joe Biden. I got to say that was it was big to do. We are back with final thoughts. 8 seconds apiece out of these. Final thoughts. If you can take a break from arguing on Facebook with Summer Barrett, Joe, you have 8 seconds. Go. Is he still arguing with Summer Barrett? All right, Duckus, Larry, you get his time.
10 days until the start of deer season. Go get them.
Bill Stubblefield.
And Joe, I feel sorry for you, but you asked for it.
Mike Carl.
Tough loss for the Commanders, but the good news is our next game's against the Cowboys.
Mike Height.
Congratulations to the Hedgesville High School girls volleyball team on their championship.
Joe, 5 seconds. You got him back. Go.
I ditto that for Hedgesville Eagles. Way to go.
Dave Ramsey Show is coming up next. This is Talk Radio, WRNR Martinsburg and TV 10. Have a great weekend. We'll talk again in 70 short hours.